The Los Angeles sun blazed mercilessly against the towering glass buildings, casting sharp reflections across the luxury boutiques that lined the exclusive shopping district. Tourists and locals weaved through the sidewalks, their designer bags swinging as they moved between stores that charged more for a single dress than most people earned in months. Among them, a sleek black SUV pulled smoothly to the curb, its tinted windows hiding the passengers inside. The door opened, and two identical figures stepped out into the California heat. Ava and Leah Johnson, 15-year-old twins, emerged with the easy confidence of teenagers who had grown up in the spotlight. Ava adjusted the strap of her crossbody bag while Leah stretched her arms above her head, letting out an exaggerated yawn that made her sister roll her eyes. "All right, quick in and out," Ava said, brushing a loose curl from her face with practiced ease. "We find our dresses, we pay, we leave. Simple." Leah smirked, her eyes sparkling with mischief. "You make it sound so boring. What if I want to try on every single dress in the store? What if I want to make this an event?" "You always want to try on everything," Ava replied with a knowing look that came from sharing 15 years of life with her twin. "That's exactly why I'm trying to keep us focused." They shared a laugh as they approached the entrance of Aura, a boutique that had become synonymous with exclusivity and astronomical price tags. The store's sleek golden lettering gleamed above the spotless glass facade, catching the sunlight and throwing it back in brilliant flashes. Inside, elegant mannequins posed in exquisite designer gowns, each piece a masterpiece of craftsmanship that cost more than luxury cars. The twins had been here before, but never alone. Their father usually accompanied them on shopping trips to places like this, his presence ensuring that they received the kind of service that came with celebrity status. Today was different. Today, there were just two teenage girls looking for dresses for an upcoming charity gala. As they stepped inside, their sneakers made a faint squeak against the polished marble floor. The boutique was spacious yet intimate, designed specifically for the kind of clientele who expected privacy while they browsed garments that appeared in fashion magazines and on red carpets. The air carried the scent of expensive perfume mixed with leather and silk, while soft classical music floated from hidden speakers, creating an atmosphere of refined luxury. Only a handful of customers moved through the space, each accompanied by a hovering sales associate eager to cater to their every whim. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over racks of clothing that represented the pinnacle of fashion, while plush velvet chairs provided comfort for those wealthy enough to afford extended shopping sessions. At first, the girls barely registered the subtle shift in atmosphere that occurred the moment they crossed the threshold. But then Ava caught it, the immediate reaction of the boutique staff. A woman behind the counter, impeccably dressed in a fitted black blazer and pencil skirt, glanced up from her tablet. Her expression remained professionally neutral, but there was something in her gaze that lingered just a second too long. It was brief, fleeting, yet unmistakable. The kind of look that assessed, calculated, and ultimately judged based on assumptions rather than facts. Leah had noticed it too. "Did she just?" she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yeah," Ava murmured, her eyes narrowing slightly as she recognized a familiar sting of judgment. They had encountered this before, though never so blatantly in a store of this caliber. Leah wasn't one to let things slide without comment. She held her head high and walked directly toward a display of evening gowns, her fingers trailing over the luxurious fabrics with genuine appreciation. The dresses were stunning, each one a work of art created by designers whose names appeared in fashion magazines worldwide. "Wow," she mused aloud, her voice carrying across the hushed space. "These are absolutely incredible. Do you think we should go with something classic and timeless, or dramatic and bold?" Ava, ever the pragmatic twin, skimmed the selection with a critical eye that came from years of attending high-profile events. "Classic is safe," she said thoughtfully. "Something timeless that photographs well. But dramatic is definitely more fun, and it would make more of a statement." Before Ava could elaborate on her thoughts, a voice cut through their conversation like a blade through silk. "Can I help you both?" The twins turned simultaneously to face the woman who had spoken. Up close, Jessica Marlowe looked like she had stepped straight out of a high-fashion advertisement. Her sleek blonde bob was perfectly styled, her icy blue eyes were lined with precision, and her expression managed to be both professionally polite and subtly condescending at once. Leah flashed her brightest smile, the one that had charmed reporters and photographers since childhood. "Yeah, I'd absolutely love to try on this one," she said enthusiastically, gesturing toward a shimmering midnight blue gown. Its delicate embroidery caught the boutique's lighting, creating patterns that seemed to shift and dance with each movement. Jessica's eyes performed a quick but thorough assessment, flicking down to Leah's outfit, a comfortable hoodie, black leggings, and pristine white sneakers, before shifting to Ava, who was dressed in a similar casual style. The corner of her mouth twitched almost imperceptibly, revealing the first crack in a professional facade. "Ah," Jessica said slowly, as if she were choosing her words with particular care. "That particular piece is from our exclusive collection." Ava crossed her arms, sensing the direction this conversation was heading. "Okay," she said evenly. "And—" Jessica's polite smile remained fixed in place, but there was something razor-sharp hiding behind it now. "It's not available for just anyone to try on." The words hung in the air like a challenge, creating a moment of silence that seemed to stretch far longer than it actually lasted. The silence that followed Jessica's words was deafening. In that moment, the atmosphere of the boutique shifted from one of luxury and refinement to something far more sinister. The soft classical music continued to play, the crystal chandeliers continued to cast their warm glow, but underneath it all, tension began to build like pressure in a sealed container. Leah let out a short laugh, as if she were trying to process whether she had actually heard what she thought she heard. "Excuse me," she said, her voice carrying a note of disbelief that would have warned anyone with common sense to backtrack immediately. Jessica's gaze remained steady, her professional mask still in place despite the dangerous ground she was treading. "We have certain policies in place to protect our more delicate pieces," she explained, her tone suggesting that this was a perfectly reasonable explanation. "Some items require approval before being handled." Ava felt irritation flare in her chest, but she schooled her features into a calm expression that revealed nothing of the storm brewing beneath the surface. "Approval from who, exactly?" she asked, her voice carefully controlled. "Management," Jessica replied without hesitation. Leah tilted her head slightly, a gesture that anyone who knew her well would recognize as a warning sign. "You mean you," she said, making it a statement rather than a question. Jessica's smile remained in place, but there was something predatory about it now. "That's correct." "I'd be happy to suggest something more appropriate for your needs," she continued, the word appropriate dripping with implications that made both twins' blood begin to boil. Leah's jaw tightened as she processed the full meaning of what was happening. This wasn't about store policy or protecting expensive merchandise. This was about assumptions, about looking at two young black women in casual clothing and deciding they didn't belong in a space reserved for the wealthy and privileged. "What exactly do you think is appropriate for us?" Leah asked, her voice dangerously quiet. Jessica let out a practiced chuckle, a sound that didn't reach her eyes and carried no warmth whatsoever. "Perhaps something more accessible," she said, the word hanging in the air like poison. There it was. The word that laid bare exactly what this confrontation was really about. Not policies, not procedures, but prejudice dressed up in the language of customer service. Ava, who had always been the calmer of the two sisters, squared her shoulders and took a step forward. "We're customers," she said evenly, each word precisely articulated. "I don't see why we need special approval to try on a dress that's for sale in a store we walked into off the street." Jessica's smile faded just a fraction, revealing the irritation she was working so hard to conceal. "Of course you're customers," she said, her voice dipping into something silkier and more dangerous. "But we must be mindful of how our garments are handled." The implication was crystal clear, and it hit both girls like a physical blow. The suggestion that they, simply by virtue of who they were and how they looked, was somehow more likely to damage expensive clothing than other customers was so blatantly discriminatory that it took their breath away. Leah felt her temper spike, but she channeled it into something more productive than rage. "Let me guess," she said, crossing her arms and fixing Jessica with a stare that could have cut glass. "If we walked in here wearing designer labels from head to toe, you'd be falling over yourself to help us, wouldn't you?" Jessica didn't respond verbally, but her expression spoke volumes. The slight tightening around her eyes, the almost imperceptible stiffening of her shoulders, everything about her body language confirmed what the twins already knew. Ava exhaled slowly through her nose, then turned back to the rack and picked up the midnight blue gown with deliberate care. She could feel the weight of the fabric, the careful construction that justified its astronomical price tag. "I'd like to try this on," she repeated, her voice unwavering despite the confrontation unfolding around them. Jessica's mask of professionalism began to crack in earnest now. For the first time, genuine irritation flickered openly in her gaze. "I must insist," she said, her voice noticeably colder than before, "that dress is part of a premium collection, and I cannot allow—" "And I must insist," Ava interrupted, her own voice dropping to match Jessica's icy tone, "that you stop assuming we can't afford it." The boutique had fallen completely silent now. Other customers had stopped their browsing to watch the drama unfold, while staff members exchanged uncomfortable glances. Everyone could sense that the situation was rapidly spiraling beyond the normal bounds of customer service disputes. Jessica's lips pressed together in a thin line of barely controlled anger. She had expected these girls to back down, to accept her judgment and slink away embarrassed. Instead, they were standing their ground and forcing her to reveal the ugly truth behind her polished facade. In a moment that would haunt her for the rest of her career, Jessica leaned closer and said in a voice just loud enough for the twins to hear, "Girls like you don't belong here." The words hit the air like a thunderclap. Leah's breath caught in her throat, not because she was surprised by the sentiment. She had felt this kind of discrimination before, but because someone had actually been bold enough to say it out loud in a public space. Jessica immediately realized she had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. Her eyes widened slightly as she registered her mistake, but instead of apologizing or attempting to backtrack, she straightened her spine and doubled down on her position. Ava's grip on the dress tightened until her knuckles went white. She could feel her pulse pounding in her ears, the familiar rush of adrenaline that came with being treated as less than human. "You're going to regret saying that," she said, her voice barely above a whisper but carrying the weight of absolute certainty. Leah's voice was even quieter, but infinitely more dangerous. "You have no idea what you just started." Jessica, still clinging to her sense of superiority, smiled with cold indifference. "Let me know if you need anything else," she said dismissively, then turned on her heel and began to walk away, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. But Ava and Leah weren't finished. Not even close. Ava and Leah remained frozen in place as Jessica's words echoed through the boutique like a gunshot. The weight of what had just happened settled over them. Thick, suffocating, and absolutely unacceptable. Around them, other customers shifted uncomfortably, some pretending they hadn't heard while others stared openly, waiting to see what would happen next. Leah's hands clenched into fists at her sides. Every instinct told her to walk away, to take the high road, to avoid making a scene in this pristine temple of luxury and privilege. But something deeper, something that connected to every person who had ever been made to feel like they didn't belong, wouldn't let her take a single step toward the exit. "I don't care what she says," Leah declared, her voice carrying across the silent boutique. "I'm trying this dress on." She turned and strode purposefully toward the fitting rooms, the midnight blue gown still draped over her arm like a banner of defiance. Each step echoed against the marble floor, announcing her refusal to be intimidated or dismissed. Ava followed close behind, her own anger burning cold and focused. She had spent her entire life learning to navigate spaces where she wasn't always welcome, but she had never encountered someone brazen enough to voice their prejudice so openly. Jessica's voice rang out sharply from across the boutique. "Miss, I must insist that you stop right there." Both sisters turned slowly, and in that moment, the confrontation teetered on the edge of something much bigger than a simple shopping dispute. This was about dignity, respect, and the right to exist in public spaces without having to prove their worthiness to people who had decided they didn't belong. Leah stood frozen, gripping the gown tightly as Jessica approached with quick, controlled steps. Her professional composure was cracking, revealing the frustrated authority figure underneath who was accustomed to having her orders followed without question. "I told you," Jessica said, slightly breathless from her rapid approach, "that dress requires special handling. You cannot simply—" "What I cannot do," Leah interrupted, her voice steady despite the rage building inside her, "is stand here and let you treat us like we're somehow less than every other customer in the store." Jessica's face flushed, but she maintained her position. "I am simply enforcing store policy. If you cannot respect our procedures—" "Your procedures," Ava cut in, her voice like steel, seemed to apply very selectively. "Tell me, do you require approval from every teenager who walks in here, or just the black ones?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Around them, the boutique had become completely silent. Even the classical music seemed to fade into the background as everyone waited for Jessica's response. Instead of answering, Jessica took a step closer to Leah, her professional mask finally slipping completely. "You need to put that dress down and leave. Now." Leah's grip on the gown tightened. "Make me." It was a dare, plain and simple. A line drawn in the sand that dared Jessica to reveal exactly who she really was beneath her designer clothing and practiced smile. Jessica looked around the boutique, suddenly aware that they had an audience. Other customers were recording with their phones. Staff members were watching with wide eyes, and the situation had spiraled far beyond her control. "I'm calling security," she announced, but her voice wavered slightly. "Go ahead," Ava replied calmly. "Call them. Let's see what they think about you refusing to let paying customers try on merchandise because you don't think we look the part." But Jessica had already lost a thread of rational thought. The authority she was so used to wielding was slipping through her fingers, and these two teenagers, these children, were making her look foolish in front of everyone. Before anyone could react, before common sense could prevail, Jessica reached forward and grabbed the dress, yanking it out of Leah's hands with enough force to make the girl stumble backward. "I told you," Jessica hissed, clutching the fabric against her chest. "This dress is not for you." The boutique erupted into gasps and murmurs of disbelief. Someone had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed, and everyone present knew they had just witnessed something that would have consequences far beyond this moment. Leah stared at Jessica in shock, not because she was surprised by the woman's prejudice, but because she had been bold enough to put her hands on a customer in full view of witnesses. Something inside Leah snapped, not into rage, but into crystal-clear focus. She reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone, holding it up and pressing record with steady fingers. "Say that again," she said, her voice calm but dangerous. "I want to make sure everyone hears exactly what you think about your customers." Jessica's eyes widened as she realized what was happening. "Turn that off," she demanded, but her voice lacked its earlier authority. "Why?" Leah asked, never lowering the phone. "Afraid people might see how you really treat customers who don't look like you think they should." The question cut through Jessica's remaining composure like a blade. She could see her career, her reputation, everything she had built, teetering on the edge of destruction. But instead of backing down, instead of apologizing and trying to salvage the situation, she doubled down on her position. "You're causing a scene," Jessica said, taking a step closer to Leah. "I will not have you disrupting my store with this performance." "Performance?" Leah's voice rose slightly. "Is that what you call asking to try on a dress? A performance?" Ava moved closer to her sister, her own phone now out and recording. "Keep talking," she said to Jessica. "Please, keep showing everyone exactly who you are." Jessica's face twisted with frustration and something approaching panic. She was trapped in a situation of her own making, with no graceful way to retreat. The boutique full of witnesses, the phones recording her every word, the growing awareness that this moment would define her future, it was all closing in around her. And then she made a mistake that would end everything. Jessica lunged forward and knocked the phone out of Leah's hand. The device clattered across the marble floor with a sound that seemed to echo through the entire boutique like a bell tolling. The silence that followed was absolute. Leah touched her face where Jessica's hand had made contact, her eyes wide with disbelief. Around them, customers gasped and several people immediately began calling 911. Ava moved quickly, retrieving Leah's phone and checking to make sure it was still recording. The screen was cracked, but the camera was functional, and it had captured everything. "I hope," Ava said, holding the phone up so Jessica could see her own reflection in the cracked screen, "you're ready for the whole world to see what just happened." Jessica's face went completely white as the full implications of her actions hit her. She had just struck a customer in front of witnesses while being recorded over a dress. And that's when everything changed forever. The boutique remained trapped in stunned silence as Ava held up the damaged phone, its cracked screen still faithfully recording every moment of Jessica's downfall. The classical music had stopped entirely now, as if the very building itself was holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Jessica Marlowe stood frozen, her face drained of color as the reality of her situation began to sink in. She had just struck a teenage customer in front of multiple witnesses, and it was all being captured on video. Her career, her reputation, everything she had worked to build was crumbling around her in real time. Leah slowly lowered her hand from her cheek, the sting of the slap still fresh, but nothing compared to the fire of indignation burning in her chest. She had been hit before, on basketball courts, during friendly wrestling matches with her sister, even in self-defense classes. But this was different. This was an assault born of prejudice and unchecked power. "You just hit me," Leah said, her voice steady but seething with controlled fury. "You actually put your hands on a customer." Jessica opened her mouth as if to deny it, to somehow spin this into something that made her the victim, but no words came out. There was nothing she could say that would undo what had just happened. Ava stepped forward, her entire body vibrating with barely contained rage. "You put your hands on my sister," she said, each word carefully articulated and carrying the weight of absolute certainty about what came next. Around them, the boutique had transformed into a scene from a nightmare. Customers were backing away, some calling the police, others recording everything on their phones. Staff members stood paralyzed, unsure whether to help their manager or distance themselves from a rapidly sinking ship. "I was protecting store property," Jessica finally managed to say, but her voice cracked on the words. Even she didn't believe what she was saying. Leah let out a laugh that held no humor whatsoever. "Store property? You mean the dress I was holding? The one I wanted to buy? That's what gave you the right to hit me." The absurdity of Jessica's excuse hung in the air like smoke from a fire. Everyone present could see through the flimsy justification to the ugly truth beneath. Jessica had lost control because two young black women had refused to accept her discriminatory treatment. Ava continued recording, making sure to capture Jessica's face as she tried to justify the unjustifiable. "Say it again," she demanded. "Tell everyone watching that you think hitting a teenager over a dress is protecting store property." Instead of answering, Jessica turned toward a nearby employee. "Call security," she ordered, but her voice lacked any authority. She was grasping at straws, trying to regain control of a situation that had spiraled completely beyond her ability to manage. The employee hesitated, clearly recognizing that calling security on assault victims while the assault was being recorded might not be the wisest course of action. "Now!" Jessica snapped, her desperation becoming more obvious with each passing second. But before anyone could make that call, Leah pulled out her own phone and dialed a number that would change everything. As the call connected, she never took her eyes off Jessica, watching as understanding began to dawn in the manager's eyes. "Dad," Leah said into the phone, her voice carrying clearly across the silent boutique. There was a pause, then a deep, unmistakable voice responded. "Leah, what's wrong?" Jessica's face went from white to gray as she caught sight of the name on Leah's phone screen. Dwayne Johnson. The Rock. One of the most recognizable and beloved figures in entertainment, a man whose very name commanded respect across multiple industries. Leah took a deep breath before delivering the words that would seal Jessica's fate. "You need to come here right now." Another pause, then the voice on the other end shifted to something dangerously calm. "Where?" Leah turned the phone's camera toward the golden lettering above the boutique entrance. "Hey!" The silence on the other end of the line stretched for several seconds, and everyone in the boutique seemed to sense that something seismic was about to occur. Finally, in a tone that sent chills through everyone who heard it, "I'm on my way." The call ended, and the boutique seemed to shrink around Jessica as the full implications hit her. She wasn't just dealing with two upset teenagers anymore. She had assaulted the daughters of Dwayne Johnson, and he was coming. "That's not necessary," Jessica said quickly, her voice tight with barely controlled panic. "Let's be reasonable about this. We can work something out." Leah stared at her with undisguised contempt. "You should have thought about being reasonable before you put your hands on me." Meanwhile, outside the boutique, the world was already reacting. Within minutes of Leah posting the video, notifications began exploding on both sisters' phones. The footage was spreading across social media platforms at lightning speed, shared and reshared by thousands of outraged viewers who couldn't believe what they were seeing. Comments flooded in from around the globe. Did she really just hit that girl over trying on a dress? This is absolutely disgusting. Fire that manager immediately. Not the messing with the Rock's daughters. Boycott this store until they fix their racist policies. Someone outside the boutique had recognized the twins and started live streaming, drawing a crowd of curious onlookers who pressed against the windows, trying to catch a glimpse of the confrontation unfolding inside. And then, cutting through the chaos of social media notifications and growing crowd noise, came the sound of a powerful engine and tires against asphalt. The black SUV pulled up to the curb with an authority that seemed to silence even the street noise. The driver barely had time to put the vehicle in park before the door swung open, and Dwayne Johnson stepped out onto the sidewalk. He was dressed in a fitted red tank top that showcased a physique that had made him famous, but it was his expression, calm, focused, and absolutely determined, that commanded attention. People on the street stopped and stayed, phones immediately rising to capture the moment. This wasn't just a celebrity sighting. This was a father responding to an emergency call from his daughters, and everyone could sense the gravity of the situation. Dwayne strode toward the boutique entrance with a kind of presence that made the very air seem to thicken around him. Each step carried the weight of someone who had never backed down from a fight and wasn't about to start now. Inside the boutique, Jessica visibly swallowed as she watched through the glass facade. Her hands were shaking now, the full reality of her situation finally sinking in. She wasn't just facing potential legal consequences anymore. She was about to confront one of the most powerful and respected figures in entertainment, a man whose daughter she had just assaulted. Ava turned toward the entrance, her expression a mixture of relief and anticipation. Leah took a step back, crossing her arms as she prepared to watch Jessica face the consequences of her actions. The door to the boutique swung open, and Dwayne Johnson entered. He paused just inside the threshold, his eyes taking in the scene. His daughter standing strong despite what they had endured, the staff frozen in obvious discomfort, the other customers watching with phones still recording, and finally, Jessica Marlowe, looking like she wanted nothing more than to disappear into the marble floor. His voice, when he spoke, was calm but carried the weight of an unstoppable force. "You," he said, looking directly at Jessica, "tell me exactly what you just did to my daughters." The reckoning had arrived. The atmosphere in the boutique had transformed completely. What had been a space dedicated to luxury and exclusivity was now the epicenter of a confrontation that would reshape everything, not just for those present, but for countless others who would see what happened next. Dwayne Johnson stood just inside the entrance, his presence filling the room in a way that made everyone acutely aware of the gravity of the situation. He wasn't performing, wasn't putting on a show for the cameras that were still recording from multiple angles. This was a father who had received an emergency call from his daughters, and everything about his demeanor communicated that he intended to get answers. Jessica Marlowe tried desperately to summon the professional composure that had served her so well in the past, but facing Dwayne Johnson after what she had done was like trying to hold back an ocean with her bare hands. "Mr. Johnson," she began, forcing what she hoped was a polite tone, "this is all just a misunderstanding." Dwayne took a single step forward, and the words died in her throat. He didn't need to raise his voice or make threats. His mere presence, combined with the absolute certainty that he would protect his daughters, was more intimidating than any display of aggression could have been. "I didn't ask for your interpretation," he said, his voice measured and controlled. "I asked you to tell me exactly what you did to my daughters." Jessica's composure cracked visibly. She looked around the boutique as if hoping someone would intervene, would somehow make the situation disappear, but found only the faces of witnesses who had seen everything and were waiting for her to answer. "I was simply enforcing store policy," she said weakly. Leah let out a sharp, humorless laugh. "Store policy? Is that what you're calling it?" Ava stepped forward, her voice deadly calm. "She slapped my sister, Dad. She put her hands on Leah because we wanted to try on a dress." A murmur rippled through the boutique. Even those who had witnessed the entire confrontation seemed shocked to hear it stated so clearly, so bluntly. Dwayne's expression didn't change dramatically. There was no explosive anger, no theatrical outburst. Instead, something far more dangerous appeared in his eyes, the cold, focused determination of someone who had found an unacceptable situation and intended to address it completely. "You put your hands on my child," he said, and though his voice remained level, everyone present felt the weight of those words. Jessica tried one more desperate gambit. "It was a misunderstanding, Mr. Johnson. Your daughters were being disruptive, and I simply—" "Careful," Leah warned, her own voice carrying an edge that suggested Jessica was about to make an already terrible situation even worse. But Jessica had passed the point of rational thought. Cornered and desperate, she doubled down on her position. They were being aggressive and refusing to follow store policies. I had to protect our merchandise. The silence that followed was deafening. Everyone in the boutique understood that Jessica had just sealed her own fate by attempting to justify striking a teenage customer. Dwayne let the words hang in the air for a long moment, allowing everyone present to fully absorb what they had just heard. When he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of absolute moral certainty. "Misunderstanding," he repeated slowly. "You struck my daughter over a dress, and you're calling it a misunderstanding." From across the boutique, a woman who had been shopping quietly throughout the confrontation suddenly spoke up. "I saw everything," she announced, stepping forward. She was elegantly dressed, clearly someone with influence and standing in the community. "I watched this manager discriminate against these girls from the moment they walked in, and I saw her hit that young woman. I will be reporting this to corporate, to the police, and to the press if necessary." Jessica's face went completely white as she realized that her support system was crumbling entirely. Even her own employees were distancing themselves, some shaking their heads in obvious disapproval of her actions. "You're making this bigger than it needs to be," Jessica said desperately. "If you would all just leave quietly, we can forget this happened." Dwayne's response was immediate and final. "No, we're not going anywhere." The certainty in his voice made it clear that this wasn't a negotiation. Jessica had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed, and now she would face the full consequences of her actions. As if on cue, the boutique's phone began ringing. One of the employees answered hesitantly. "Aura Boutique, how may I?" She stopped mid-sentence, her face going pale. She slowly lowered the phone and turned toward Jessica. "It's corporate," she said quietly. The video Leah had posted was spreading like wildfire across every social media platform. News outlets were picking up the story, celebrities were sharing it, and the #HashStandTall movement was trending worldwide. Within hours, the footage had been viewed millions of times, and the outrage was universal. Jessica stared at the phone as if it were a snake, knowing that answering would confirm what she already knew. Her career was over. Dwayne turned to his daughters, his voice softening as he addressed them. "Are you ready to go?" Ava and Leah exchanged a look. Their fight wasn't just about this moment anymore. It had become something much larger, something that could create lasting change. "Actually, Dad," Leah said, "I think we want to make a statement first." Outside the boutique, news vans were already arriving. Reporters were setting up cameras, and crowds of supporters were gathering on the sidewalk. What had started as a simple shopping trip had become a national conversation about discrimination, privilege, and the courage required to stand up to injustice. Ava held up her phone one final time, addressing the camera directly. "This isn't just about us," she said. "This is about everyone who has ever been treated like they don't belong because of how they look or where they come from. We're not going to let this slide, and we're not going to be quiet about it." Leah nodded, taking the phone. "If you've experienced something like this, share your story. Use the #StandTall movement. Let's make sure this never happens to anyone else." As they prepared to leave the boutique, Dwayne put a protective arm around each of his daughters. They had handled themselves with dignity, courage, and wisdom beyond their years. They had turned a moment of injustice into a catalyst for change. Behind them, Jessica Marlowe stood alone among the ruins of a career, finally understanding the true cost of her prejudice. Corporate had already made their decision. She was terminated immediately. The police were on their way to take statements about the assault, and the entire world had seen exactly who she really was beneath her professional facade. But for Ava and Leah Johnson, this was just the beginning. Over the following weeks, they would launch initiatives to combat retail discrimination, partner with civil rights organizations, and create resources for others who face similar treatment. Their Stand Tall movement would grow into something that changed policies at retail chains across the country. What had started as two teenagers trying to buy dresses had become a moment that reminded the world that dignity is not negotiable, that standing up to injustice is always the right choice, and that sometimes the most powerful response to discrimination is simply refusing to be silenced. The boutique door closed behind them, but their fight for justice was just beginning.